Okay, good evening, everybody. Today we'll be speaking about rheumatic fever and rheumatic heart disease and a few slides on the anesthesia implications if the patient with rheumatic fever or rheumatic heart disease presents to us for any surgery. So beginning with rheumatic fever first. So as we all know that the source of rheumatic fever and rheumatic heart disease is same. That is a throat infection which is caused by beta hemolytic streptococci. So initially there is a pharyngeal inflammation which is caused by these beta hemolytic streptococci, and then after 1 to 2 weeks the patient presents with the major or the minor manifestations of rheumatic fever. And then if one of the major components of rheumatic fever is carditis, so if that stays persistently, if the damage to the heart is permanent or for a prolonged duration of time, then we refer it to as rheumatic heart disease. So, rheumatic fever is the result of an autoimmune response to pharyngitis, which is caused by infection by Landsfeld group A beta hemolytic streptococci, and it leads to an inflammatory illness which affects the joints. It also causes valvular regurgitation in the heart. With the potential of secondary heart failure, it can also have other manifestations like chorea, skin and subcutaneous manifestations, and most importantly, fever. Rheumatic heart disease, like just we discussed now, that it's a chronic disease which is caused by accumulated heart valve damage from a single or severe, more commonly multiple recurrent acute rheumatic fever episodes. Its prevalence is generally in adulthood, usually between the ages of 25 to 45 years. So this is the difference in between acute rheumatic fever, rheumatic carditis, and rheumatic heart disease. We just saw that rheumatic fever is nothing but an autoimmune reaction to the infection by group A beta hemolytic streptococci, um, after which the patient presents with the major and minor manifestations of rheumatic fever, about which we will speak about in the coming slides. And one of the major manifestations of rheumatic fever is your rheumatic carditis. Carditis signifies inflammation. So there is an inflammation of the heart tissues. All the three layers of the heart can get affected, and also the valves get involved. Most commonly, mitral valve, followed by the aortic valve, and very less commonly, the tricuspid valve may also get affected. But if these carditis changes, the heart changes, stay persistent, and they finally result in valvular damage like mitral or aortic regurgitation, or even stenosis, finally leading to heart failure or arrhythmias or other complications, then we term it as rheumatic heart disease. So that is the basic difference. So risk factors for rheumatic fever are children in between the age group of 5 to 14 years are more commonly affected. It's rarely observed above the age group of 35 to 40 years. They say that it's common in males and females. Both males and females are equally affected with rheumatic fever. But there's also a belief that probably females are more prone for rheumatic fever, probably because they stay at home more, specifically in rural areas, and they come in contact with children also the most. So the relative risk of 1.6 to 2 in females is high as compared to males. Also, environmental factors are responsible wherever there is household crowding and poverty. These are the root causes for increased amount of infection, and the patient may present with rheumatic fever. So now, what is the pathophysiology of rheumatic fever? Why do we say that it's an autoimmune infection? So there are several mechanisms which are proposed behind it, out of which the most common one is the immune mimicry or the molecular mimicry, in which they say that the streptococci, whenever they invade the pharyngeal epithelium, antibodies are formed against it. Those antibodies, initially there is a humoral response, and then there is a T cell. So B cells get activated first, and then followed by T cells also. There is a formation of these immune complexes, and these immune complexes get deposited in the various organs of the heart and cause rheumatic fever. There's another theory called as the cytotoxic theory, in which they say that the enzyme by streptococci, that is a streptolysin O enzyme, is directly toxic to the cardiac cells, which can induce damage. And another theory is binding of M protein to collagen type 4. So M protein is a component of streptococci. So that binds to collagen type 4 in the heart, which results in the inflammation of myocardium and cardiac valves. So basically what we mean by immune mimicry or the molecular mimicry, which is the most common mechanism that is proposed for the pathophysiology of rheumatic fever, is that there are several proteins and some factors of streptococci which are quite similar to our normal body components. So, for example, the M protein in streptococci or NMDA, some other components also, which are quite similar to cardiac myosin or other proteins, because of which the antibody attack, which is mainly targeted towards the streptococci that also starts affecting our normal bodily tissues, and that is why the autoimmune response sets in. So that is actually called as a molecular mimicry. So this is the most common pathophysiology proposed for rheumatic fever, and that is why we say that it's an autoimmune condition. So there is a deposition of immune complexes also, and also the antibodies that get formed against the streptococci, they also attack our normal bodily components. So, rheumatic fever generally occurs 1 to 3 weeks following the pharyngitis. And so, initially, the patient will present only with pharyngitis, patient will present only with sore throat. But then, if it goes unnoticed, within 1 to 3 weeks, the patient will start having other manifestations of rheumatic fever. So, the streptococci attach to the pharyngeal epithelium by means of fimbriae, which carry the M protein. Streptococci also possess hyaluronic acid, which resists phagocytosis. And these products like the M protein, the hyaluronic acid, they diffuse out of the pharyngeal epithelium and they stimulate an antibody response by stimulating lymphoid cells. And that is how the autoimmune process begins. So when to suspect acute rheumatic fever? Now, any we get affected with viral fever day in and out, and it's very difficult. But when specifically talking about beta hemolytic streptococci pharyngitis, which is a inciting event for rheumatic fever, in those cases patients will be having mainly sore throat and a sudden onset of high grade fever, unlike in viral fever where the fever is quite low grade. The patient on examination will be having pharyngotonsillar inflammation plus cervical lymphadenopathy. Other symptoms of URTI like coryza or cough or even conjunctivitis hoarseness, then this possibility of acute rheumatic fever is quite less likely. So you are all aware of the major and the minor manifestations of the Duckett-Jones criteria, which is used to diagnose the rheumatic fever. So generally, we say that if the diagnosis of acute rheumatic fever requires presence of two major criteria or one major criteria and two minor criteria. Now, in 2015, the American Heart Association revised these guidelines. There is not much change in it, but what they did is that they divided the population into two groups. One is a low risk population and one is the moderate to high risk population. We will see what it means. So they just put the major and the minor manifestations in these two different populations. The differences are that in moderate to high risk population, they included monoarthritis also or polyarthralgia also as a major manifestation. Unlike in low risk, only polyarthritis was a component. But when you know that the patient belongs to a moderate to high risk population group, even a single joint inflammation will be considered as a major manifestation of rheumatic fever. Another difference is the erythrocyte sedimentation rate. In low risk, it is taken at more than 60 mm per hour, and in moderate to high risk population, it is taken at more than 30 mm per hour. So these are the two key differences in these revised Jones criteria. For recurrent acute rheumatic fever, the diagnosis is we require two major criteria, one major or two minor criteria, but three minor criteria can also be used to diagnose recurrent acute rheumatic fever. Always remember that for the diagnosis of either initial first episode of acute rheumatic fever or recurrent rheumatic fever, we always need the evidence of streptococcal infection. So talking about these two groups of population, so they divided these population groups as per the incidence of acute rheumatic fever per 1 lakh school age children and rheumatic heart disease prevalence per 1,000 all age population. Because we know that rheumatic fever per se is quite common in children in the age group of 5 to 14 years, but rheumatic heart disease occurs quite late, doesn't really occur beyond the age of 40-45 years, but they have considered rheumatic heart disease prevalence per 1,000 all age population. So if the risk of acute rheumatic fever in the school age children was less than 2, they termed it as low risk. If it was more than 2, then it was moderate to high risk. If the rheumatic heart disease prevalence was less than 1, then it was classified as low risk, and if it was more than 1, then it was classified as moderate to high risk. We just spoke about how to diagnose acute rheumatic fever or recurrent rheumatic fever, where we require one major plus two minor criteria, or three minor criteria for a recurrent rheumatic fever. But we also require evidence of streptococcal infection in these patients. And how do we get that evidence? One is microbiological. So either we get a positive throat swab culture or a rapid streptococcal antigen test, or serological